So I would like to acknowledge that we are all on territories of Indigenous peoples. I personally am on the traditional territory, unceded territory of the Comox First Nation. And so we respect those peoples who allow us to be guests if we're guests or settlers on those lands, or if we're from those lands, then we honor those people. And so my name is Jackie Lever. I'm the Executive Director of North Island Métis, and I'm really, really happy and excited tonight to have Denise Findlay here to talk about addressing lateral violence. And so I'm just going to turn it over to Denise and I'll allow her to introduce herself. So thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for having me. Welcome, everybody. My name is Denise Findlay, and I'm coming to you tonight from the village of Hamulchison and the sacred lands of the Squamish people, which is the community that I belong to and come from. What do I want to say about myself? I had this all thought out in my head, of course, but when it comes to talking about myself, I lose all those words. I've been working at this for a really long time, trying to make sense of this thing called lateral violence. And when I first started doing this work, I don't even think people were using the terminology. I think I was part of, the movement towards developing awareness around this subject. So over the years, or over the past 15 years, certainly my work and my life has evolved, and my ideas about things have evolved. And I feel like now I have my own private practice. I've just recently developed a program called Gathering Our Medicine for the Maples Adolescent Treatment Center that's being delivered by the province to community. And I'm starting my PhD in the fall. And I'm waiting for them to send me the notice saying it was a mistake. I keep joking and saying to everybody, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not that smart. But apparently I guess I'm smart enough. So my area of research, or my focus, is quite multifaceted, but it really is to take a look at rituals, Indigenous healing rituals, cross-culturally, and to really get to the bottom of purpose, what purpose certain things served, in what context did they emerge, and how with the science of healing and neurobiology today can we apply ritual and rites of passage to as a healing modality for individuals, but also systemically, like in the mental health system, in our healthcare system, in our educational system. And so I'm learning all kinds of things right now, and I'm at the beginning of this really exciting journey. And so my work has really, because of my discoveries, my work has really evolved to encompass culture and the rich cultures of different peoples, and how things that are inherently part of those cultures provide the conditions for transformation, healing, and addressing problems such as this one, this thing we call lateral violence. So that's me. I have so much to say tonight, and I always over-prepare. So Jackie, I have so many slides, but I might not get through them. And so after Chanel, if we can let Chanel just introduce herself quickly, what I would love to do is just ask everyone to type in the chat sort of where you're at and what you do, or what brings you, just something short, so I have a sense of who's with us tonight. That would be really helpful for me, because then I can say things that will help me articulate my message for the audience. Chanel, are you there?
I'm here. Can you see me?
Yep.
Beautiful. Hello, everybody. My name is Chanel Bath. I am so excited to be here with you this evening. I come from Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 territory on my mother's side. So I am Cree and actually Métis. And then on my father's side, I am English and Spanish. And I am coming from the traditional territory of Coquitlam First Nation. So glad and honored to be here to support Denise. And kind of what I'll be doing today is reading out your comments. Typically when I've been with Denise in different Zooms and different presentations, I like to read the chat and kind of support in that way.
Yes, it's great. Thank you. So we do encourage typing in the chat. We have found that when people type in the chat and Chanel's able to read out your comments, it feels like a more inclusive learning environment for everybody. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what I'd love and invite you to do is just type in the chat where are you at geographically, I guess, and either what it is that you do or what what context, in which context do you come to this? Like why do you want to know about this?
Beautiful. So we have Arva writing, hi everyone, I'm in Campbell River. I'm a birth and postpartum doula and childbirth educator. Thanks for having me.
Lovely.
Thank you, Arva. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. And Rachel shares, hello, Rachel Kane here. I'm the cultural connections worker for Sassaman Society here in Campbell River. Welcome.
Lovely.
Rosalind says, Tanshi, I am a social worker living with metastatic breast cancer who recently discovered my mother is Red River Métis. I live in New Brunswick. Welcome, Rosalind. Thank you.
Welcome.
I don't know how to do the chat thing.
Well, you can just tell us.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So I'm Susan Landell from Campbell River in the territory of the Lakewood people, and I'm a cultural support worker for South and Laleham.
Ah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So nice to be here. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for being here.
And Denise Anita shares, I'm healing from lateral violence in an Indigenous post-secondary setting. I'm a casual Indigenous instructional assistant at Camosun College in Victoria, BC.
Welcome.
We have Charlotte Lever joining us, Vice President, and I work in the office of North Island Métis, living in Campbell River.
Welcome.
Anne is joining us from Ladysmith, BC, Mid-Island Métis Community Rep. And we have Barb, originally from Selkirk, Manitoba. I am an old one at University Victoria and a retired nurse. Oh, we're getting lots of replies. I'm gonna make my chat a little bit bigger. Okay, Zoe says, hi everyone, my name is Zoe. I'm grateful to be living in the territory of the Lekwungen people. I'm an Indigenous youth intern and currently working with the Métis Nation of Greater Victoria. Beautiful. Judy shares, hi and thanks for the privilege of learning. I'm Judy from Gold River, working for Lequiltuck Family Life Society, working with the outreach program and on a huge learning curve. Patrick shares, I'm from Winnipeg, but have lived in Victoria for over 30 years. I'm a gardener by trade, and I'm the president of Métis Nation Greater Victoria. I've long thought that we, as an Indigenous nation, need to have those rituals that bind a community together and uplift and support each other.
Lovely.
Tabitha says, I'm living in Powell River. My name is Tabitha. I'm a mother and aspiring graduate student. I'm the president of Métis Nation Powell River. Deborah Martel, thank you for this opportunity. Currently in Campbell River as a district principal, but longtime educator, K-12 and university. Cree Métis dad and an Irish-Scottish mom from Winnipeg. I'm here to learn more, to support others, but someone who has also experienced lateral violence. It is always great to learn more to heal myself.
Beautiful.
Okay.
And grilled cheese.
And then we have Jody. Hi, everyone. My name is Jody. I'm in Burnaby. I'm a drama teacher and massage therapist. I'm hoping to train as an Indigenous educational assistant. I've always felt that we cannot end bullying until we address lateral violence. So I'm very interested in strategies for healing. Thanks so much
Beautiful.
for having me.
Thank you.
It sounds like we have such an amazing group of people.
Yeah, it just helps to orient. Like we can situate, if we can situate where everyone is, and then we feel a better sense of orientation, I find, and grounding. Are there any more, Chanel?
Yeah, Mariana, she joins us. She's the women's rep for Métis Nation, Greater Victoria, and a retired nurse. Found late in life my Métis ancestry from Saskatchewan, Red River, mother's side, and father is Swedish. Thank you for offering this.
Beautiful.
Maybe we've had a few new people come in. Perhaps we could just say the question again.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm just walking outside where it might be a little quieter. We were just asking everyone to let us know where are you from, where are you at geographically now, and what brings you to this training? Like, what is it that you do, and which context do you come to it? Now I'm in my backyard.
So if you're comfortable to type in the chat, and then I'll be reading it out so Denise can hear.
Well, there's a lot of what while we're waiting, I'll just talk a little bit. You know, I was talking to Chanel about this. We are creatures, we're social creatures, we're creatures of relationship. And, you know, with the loss of culture are all the lovely relationship rituals that create the container for things to happen. And so in our busy life, we're prone to skipping over these things. And I don't know about you, but when I skip over these things don't feel right. And they don't often go as well as they do when we take the time to connect with each other. And so I think that's a very important step that we need to carve out space for. Anyone else, Chanel?
No. And I was just checking in, making sure that I've read everybody. Oh, we have one more. Patty. I'm Métis and Ojibwe from Turtle Mountain on my father's side and Irish. I grew up in California and I'm looking forward to the training today.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Patty.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. That really helps me. When I was putting together the presentation for today, I never do the same presentation twice, by the way, ever. I always think about who I'm talking to and what new information has come to me, what new knowledges have come to me, and what's going on in the world. And I try to contextualize it. And I have this lovely little book, The Best of Chief Dan George, and I was looking, I have a bunch of books, but I was looking through for inspiration, and I found something, and I thought I would just start by reading out some of it. It's longish, and so for those of you who are interested in finding it, you can probably just Google it afterwards. But and Chief Dan George was a very good friend of my great-grandfather. They worked as longshoremen together. And Chief Dan George was there to bear witness to the birth of my grandfather. So I feel a close kinship with him and his family. But in this book called The Best of Chief Dan George, My Heart Soars, this passage is called I Am a Native of North America. And he says, in the course of my lifetime, I have lived in two distinct cultures. I was born into a culture that lived in communal houses. My grandfather's house was 80 feet long. It was called a smokehouse, and it stood down by the beach along the inlet. All my grandfather's sons and their families lived in this large dwelling. Their sleeping apartments were separated by blankets made of bulrush reeds, but one open fire in the middle served the cooking needs of all. In houses like these, throughout the tribe, people learn to live with one another, learn to serve one another, learn to respect the rights of one another. And children shared the thoughts of the adult world and found themselves surrounded by aunts and uncles and cousins who loved them and did not threaten them. My father was born in such a house and learned from infancy how to love people and be at home with them. And beyond this acceptance of one another, there was a deep respect for everything in nature that surrounded them. My father loved the earth and all its creatures. The earth was his second mother. The earth and everything it contained was a gift from CEAM, and the way to thank this great spirit was to use his gifts and respect. I remember as a little boy fishing with him up Indian River, and I can still see him as the sun rose above the mountaintop in the early morning. I can see him standing by the water's edge with his arms raised above his head while he softly moaned, "Thank you, thank you." It left a deep impression on my young mind, and I shall never forget his disappointment when once he caught me gaffing for fish just for the fun of it. "My son," he said, "the Great Spirit gave you those fish to be your brothers, to feed you when you are hungry. You must respect them. You must not kill them just for the fun of it." But he goes on for a few pages to talk about growing up in these two distinct cultures and what he learned from his Indigenous heritage and what he saw happening in terms of colonization and the dichotomy between the Western and Indigenous worlds. But what he arrives to at the end of that passage is he talks about love and its necessity, and how when we don't have it and we are not raised with it, things go terribly wrong. And a lot of my work, a lot of what I have to share, a lot of the knowledges that I bring forward have to do with this understanding of the importance of relationship, of the importance of love, and the importance of certain conditions being met in order for human development to unfold as nature intended, so we can reach our potential as emotionally mature beings. And so that also gives me great insight and clues into what can go wrong along the way, and what that can look like in society and in groups, and the way that groups can turn on each other, or the way individuals can turn on each other. So if you're interested in reading the rest of that, you can actually Google it, and it's online, but it's a lovely, if you have the time. I don't want to take too much time today because we have so many different things to cover. But where I'd like to go next is I want to invite you to take a moment to reflect. I want you to imagine what it was like in the long ago. And I also want you to think about some of our wise elders and knowledge keepers of today. And some of you there may be wise elders and knowledge keepers with us today on this Zoom session. But I want you to imagine, when you think about them and you hold them in your mind's eye, what are some of the characteristics that stand out to you? How would you describe them? What are the virtues or characteristics? How do they carry themselves in the world? And then just type a couple words in the chat. And then Chanel will just read some of those things out.
And while we're waiting for people to type, I just want to introduce Jackie, Denise. Jackie wrote while you were reading.
Oh,
I'm
please.
on
Yeah.
unceded territories, like Silu territory, and I work with all Indigenous peoples, including the Métis.
Beautiful. We have an amazing group here, Jackie.
Absolutely. So I'm seeing respectful, empathetic, honorable, compassionate, understanding, shares teachings through stories, resilient, traditional teacher, wise, gentle, understanding, kind, and humorous. True guiders, kind, gentle, and grounded, proud Métis.
Yeah, so beautiful, of course, right? That's easy for us to recognize those things in another person. And certainly if someone like that has touched our life or been there as a teacher or a guide for us at some point during our life, I think that we can trip over this a little bit when we see what might be considered not that or the opposite of that, in thinking that this is something that can be taught or can be learned, when really it is a deeply developmental thing. That these characteristics, all of what you listed, and all of these things, to be caring and considerate, to have concern for the whole and not just oneself or one's own little group of people, to walk with a sense of integrity meaning that our outsides match our insides and we don't succumb to stress. We don't alter ourselves in the face of stress. We are true to ourselves. Warmth, understanding, people, those kind, caring elders that are in the lead, that are leading us in a good way. Let's see. I have to move my thing over. There we go. Expressive, not afraid to express emotion or to share emotion. Unhurried and restful, and that is something that we don't often see in our world anymore. Wise, someone that has lived experience. Protective, someone who is protective of others. Inviting, visionary, knowing themselves, curious, balanced, creative, playful, reflective, tolerant, and patient. Now, when you think about all the things you've shared and all of these things that are listed on the slide here, these can't be taken for granted. These are not automatic. We are born with this innate capacity to develop all of this and to become all of this and more. But there's not a guarantee. I'm wondering if you can hear that noise in the background. Can you?
Yes, so everyone's muted except for you, Denise. So
I'm gonna move, but I'm gonna move again. Sorry, guys. Yeah. Of all nights for my neighbors to have music on. They never play music. It's like they know I'm out there. Look, good thing I have lots of rooms to move around. Now I'm in the dark. Yeah. So this is a really important construct to understand, that these things are grown and they are born out of certain conditions being met in our life. Even the kind of integrity it takes to be in a workplace in which you're feeling perhaps unwelcome, left out, even bullied at times. There's a developmental aspect to one's ability to withstand that kind of pressure in the world without it breaking us or turning us into the very thing that we are, repulsed by, or that feels alienating for us. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so, a lot of what happens in our school system today, and with bullying programs and everything else, we're talking about teaching people these things. Well, these are not things that actually can be taught. That's an outside-in approach. We're talking about growing these things from the inside out. And it doesn't matter how old you are and how stuck you may be. If the conditions are right for healing, there's always the potential to develop these things. My stepdaughter's laughing at me because I'm in her suite now. It's too loud out there. There's music. Too funny. And all of those characteristics that I just described to you describe a person who is resilient.
Denise, I just want to share a comment from Jackie.
Yeah.
Connecting it to what you were just talking about, but nobody is left behind with the Indigenous peoples. If one falls behind or didn't gather enough to survive, they helped one another as one nation and one family, one heart, one mind.
Yes.
Really beautiful.
Yes, and in tribal life, it's so very congruent and true. And even today, living in my own community that is fraught with difficulty, and fraught with social dysfunction, and the impacts of trauma and a loss of resilience are very evident in a lot of places. When the chips are down, say someone passes away, the instinct and impulse is to care for and protect and to come to the aid of. So you can still see those instincts despite all that has happened and everything that folks have been through. But if you think about resilience, because we can't really talk about lateral violence outside of the context of understanding resilience, because resilience is the capacity to bounce back after a period of stress. And it is like a bouncing ball. When we suffer a blow, emotionally or psychologically, and sometimes physically, an injury or something like that, how quickly we bounce back from that and how quickly we return to an optimal state of functioning will be dependent on how much resilience there is. And resilience is another way, it's an intuitive way. Bouncing back is a very intuitive way of talking about this thing called neuroplasticity. And this plasticity in the brain, that our brain is an incredible organ with this incredible capacity for repairing itself. And I'm reading a book right now by Ian McGilchrist called The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. And in it, he says, science now says that there are likely as many particles in the human brain as there are in the known universe. Doesn't that make you feel good? Think about all that's in your head. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah. So let's look at the signs of resilience, and then we're gonna build up, and then we're gonna talk about lateral violence. But these are the signs of resilience. This is how you know there's resilience there. Doesn't matter how old you are. If there's a sense of playfulness present, if there's a twinkle in the eye, if there is, that bright open face, if there's the ability to smile, to find, a sense of humor, and to play, not work, but play, that is an indicator of resilience. Think about times where you've experienced a huge amount of stress. You don't feel very playful then, do you?
No.
I become very serious.
Straight face.
The face goes blank. It's like a wall in the eyes, and all of a sudden you're in the work mode, because the brain is at work trying to fix a situation and respond to a situation and make sure you're okay. And so playfulness is a sign of resilience. And we all know people, those elders that have that twinkle in their eye, and they've got that the wit and the funny little sayings, and they're always joking and they're always playing. the other sign of resilience is this capacity for rest. And that doesn't mean sleeping. What that means is a capacity to rest in the care of another person, to receive care from another person, rest in the nervous system. And so when you see somebody who can't sit still, who's always restless, in youth, you can often, the shifty eyes are an indicator of a very alarmed person, a nervous system that's never coming to rest, that the eyes are always shifting and can't settle. A lot of our youth today, get a diagnosis of ADHD. They're incredibly restless, which is an indication that they are either very alarmed, or very defended, which I'll talk about a bit more. But this ability to rest, the best way I can describe it is that if you've ever had a really, really good cry where you've really the ugly cry, if you think about the last time you had that, and for some of us, it's hard for me to cry based on my own lived experiences. And I was conditioned to only cry by myself because when I was raised by my grandmother. And so when I cried, I was sent to my room. And what I was to do in my room was to get myself together and not come out until I wasn't able to show any emotion, no longer showing any signs of emotion or vulnerability. And so my emotion is very shy. It doesn't come very easily. But we need this kind of rest for that resilience to be there. And then the other indicator is this ability to feel our most vulnerable emotions. An ability to feel sad, to feel afraid, to say we miss somebody, to say that our feelings were hurt. So not just the physiological response, but that it registers cognitively and we're able to express it. Because we know a lot of people who've had a lot of really awful things happen to them in their lifetime that are no longer feeling anything. They're quite numb. And there's a reason for that. That's a survival mechanism. There's nothing wrong with that. When you see someone hardened that way, you know that they've been through a lot and they have not had the luxury of feeling their vulnerable emotions. And so tears are a symbol of transformation. Tears are a symbol of resilience. It doesn't matter what has happened to us in our lifetime. If we can cry about it, we will heal. The brain will find a way around, and we will adapt. We would not be here if it wasn't for our adaptive capacity. We are so adaptive. Are there any comments or anything you want to say, Chanel, or?
Oh,
I can go back.
Lie that you just shared is so powerful. And just in my own family, I think of quite a few of my family members, or even myself, we've struggled with this ability to cry. So we don't have time to do that. We just got to, right?
Yeah.
And the words around it being a luxury
Yeah.
really, really resonates with me.
Yeah. It is a luxury to feel. And we don't need to feel all the time, but we do need a time to feel and get our feelings back. And I was, I'm surrounded by adults who are very much like that. I think I've seen my dad's eyes water up a few times in my whole life. Water up. Because something has momentarily touched his heart, but it's just a glimpse. It's just a little glimmer of that, and then it's gone. And there's reasons for that. He hasn't been afforded that luxury in his lifetime.
Beautiful. And we just have a comment from Rosalind. Children and youth are overstimulated. And I think that was connected to what we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, because if we think about overstimulation, what does that really mean? what that really means is that there's more going in than is ever coming out. And so there's no empty spaces left anymore in a child's life for them to have emotions.
Jody shares the ability to name emotions had been suppressing was the most transformative part of my son's counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Yeah, verbal expression, when we're able to express our emotions verbally and name them, that is such a gift to be there, to do that. And for some people, whether they're adults or children or adolescents, are not able to get there right away, know that the ability to do that, you don't have to name it to heal, but naming it certainly can bring healing. Raw expression of that emotion is the precursor to emotional development, if that makes sense. That's an important point, because we have a lot of folks who've been impacted by colonization, residential school, generations of trauma, that don't know what they're feeling at all. The emotion has not been able to move in them ever. And so getting the movement going is the first step in that dance of becoming or being able to say, I'm sad, or I was afraid.
Denise Jackie shares, I was told by my ancestors that the ancestors speak through the heart, and it is important we keep our heart soft. When a heart becomes callous, it's hard for our ancestors to communicate with us. It's like a portal to our ancestors.
Yeah. Yeah, it's our sense organ. You know, we sense so much. Our emotions are ancient, and they are far more sophisticated, they now know, than the cognitive brain. And if you've done any reading about affective neuroscience or the research that's been done on the emotional brain, if you pay close attention to the writing, you know, scientists don't like to talk about matters of love or spirituality because, of course, science doesn't want to include those things. But if you pay close attention to the writing by some of these folks who are the pioneers in looking at emotions, the neurobiology of emotions, you can see that they can't really pull apart emotion from spirit, or this life force, or this energy that moves in us, that's this great mystery, that's this ancient part of the brain. And I find that fascinating. And so what you say is true. Stopping emotion from moving is like stopping the spirit from moving. And so you hear our elders say, your spirit has left you, or you're disconnected from your spirit. That is really what's happening. That is what they're saying, is that the spirit is no longer able to move us because we're not feeling it anymore.
That just reminds me of many of the young people that I work with as a youth worker describe that, Denise, that their spirit has left them.
Yeah. Yeah. But the beautiful thing about that is it can be reclaimed. It can be recovered. It can be recovered, and culture can do that in the most beautiful and indirect of ways, that is non-pathologizing, it's non-harmful, it feels natural, but we're going to get there. So let's juxtapose what we just talked about in terms of like the wise elder, the ancestors, the knowledge keepers, the soft-hearted person, with what we see when there's signs of emotional hardening. And this in contemporary society today and culture, this is celebrated And actually, it's almost like a rite of passage when you can become this way. An unintended kind of a rite of passage for adolescents, to become cool and unaffected, to not show emotions. And that's different. I think I was always something, I believe that my grandmother kept my soft heart despite my traumas, and my connection to my mom, who passed when I was a baby, kept my heart soft. But I used to have to pretend to be like this to fit in, but I really wasn't. There's a difference between feigning it and the heart when the hardening takes place. And so when you see these signs of emotional hardening, person no longer talks about what distresses or hurts feelings, no longer feels safe or unsafe or alarmed, can no longer read rejection or stay out of harm's way. Well, that's what happens when you get victims of bullying too. Sometimes we are placing ourselves in the way of the bully. We can't see trouble coming. Our emotions are not moving us out of the way. They're not able to because they're not registering. We don't feel futility when things don't work. We're not given to sadness or disappointment. We lose our tears. We become fearless and tearless. We don't feel the emptiness or longing. And here's the thing. This is what we trip over in society. We are able to function or perform under duress. So our functioning improves. So I'm going to say something that might be slightly politically incorrect, but I'm going to say it anyways. Think of one American president who fits this profile of emotional hardening, but performs quite well under duress and it doesn't flinch. And that's the role model for America at the moment.
Denise, I just want to read you some of our beautiful comments that are coming. Just take this moment. Patrick shares, I think one of the things ritual does is bring out, make us familiar with, and name our emotions in a safe space with others. Arva shares, naming our emotions and speaking them can mean releasing and expanding on them too, letting them out, creating connections based on our vulnerability.
Yes.
And Rosalind shares, is it strange that I'm crying? Not strange at all.
No, that's wonderful. Tears are a beautiful thing. And yes, when we are able in a communal setting where we feel cared for by our own people to share our deepest emotions and to feel known and understood by each other, the kind of psychological intimacy that creates is actually needed for survival of a tribe or a social group. So if you think about all of the different stressors, right? We're talking about the stress response, the hardening that happens, that when we're under stress, our emotions, that we have more emotion, but we don't feel our emotions. There's a loss of feeling, that we lose our rest, we lose our play. We're in the work mode. The brain is working hard to fix a situation that's unsafe for us. We're not meant to be in chronic situations of stress. So as a result, this hardening takes place and our functioning improves. We become equipped to function in a very wounding world. And now we don't see or hear or feel all of the wounds around us. This becomes normalized. It's very unnatural, and yet we become accustomed to living in this kind of environment. But it comes at a great cost. It comes at the cost to our reaching of our human potential, whatever that might be, as emotional beings, creatures, and it comes at the cost of our relationships with each other. And this is the long-term impact of sustained stress that we as Indigenous people have been under for hundreds of years and still today. And everyone has a different story, of regardless of who you are or where you come from. you will have these stories of feeling like you didn't fit in, or you didn't belong, or being treated like an outsider, or not being able to really be who you were. Or who you are. So let's look. This is a good segue into talking about this thing called lateral violence. That I don't think is it's not the best term because it's an umbrella term. It just describes a set of symptoms. It doesn't really give us any insight into anything. It's a descriptor. It's a label for a bunch of different symptoms. But when you think about all the acts of hostility, acts of aggression that we grow up with in our communities, in our families, in the school system, in the mental health system, in the medical system, in organizations that we work for, there's this whole spectrum of things. And each person, if we heard each of you speak tonight, we would hear different stories, unique stories, but the same thread of attacking energy would be present in all of those stories. And aggression is not just a physical act of violence, you see. It's a spectrum, it can be, but aggression can be self-attack. And these are eruptions of this harmful energy that goes out and displaces out onto other people. And you know what, I will just use myself as an example. When I've been under a huge amount of stress, chronically, and some of you who know my story will know that my husband passed away a couple of years ago, and I was looking after him for 2 years and my 2 little boys, and it was a very stressful time for me. I had no time. There was no play left in me. I was in the work mode. I was having to survive something really difficult, and I was very edgy. I was under this chronic state of stress, and I was incredibly edgy. And I was displacing eruptions of attacking energy all over the place. I was snapping at people. I was fighting and arguing with my family. I was argumentative. I was saying things uncharacteristic of me. I was being unkind. People were coming to my door. I was almost slamming the door in people's faces because I was in this state where I was full of this frustration and it had nowhere to go, and it was erupting in all this attacking energy, you see. I hear a squeaky toy.
I'm the guilty party, sorry.
Okay, perfect timing. This is really important to understand, that this is existential. We all erupt with attacking energy, but when we are under chronic stress, we are full of attacking energy that it can't come out usually directly. We can't express, and often underneath aggression is sadness, the more vulnerable emotion. And so it's displacing out onto everyone and to everything. And it will often displace onto someone where, here's the most important part of this, is that it will, because it's not conscious, it's something that happens to us. And so we can be very frustrated, full of aggression, not know we're frustrated, not know we're full of aggression, and we go into work and someone crosses us the wrong way and bam, they get it. it often displaces out into contexts where there's going to be maybe fewer repercussions or where it's not going to jeopardize a relationship. We generally do not take our attacking energy out on the people closest to us. Sometimes we do. It depends. You have to contextualize it. But this displaced kind of energy, where you see this in workplaces, where you see this in communities, you have a lot of very frustrated people. Chronic stress, not to mention the social challenges people experience today with poverty, domestic violence, addictions. So when there's this loss of feeling, emotion can't come out, it can't be expressed directly, so it gets displaced. And so we get this thing called displaced aggression. And when there's a loss of feeling, you get a loss of empathy. And now you get this person who becomes a bully. And just, you know, bullies are not bullies in every context. You have bullies who might be bullies at work, and then they might go home and their partner may be the one in charge. But you only have a bully where there's a loss of feeling and a loss of empathy, because we are wired instinctively to care for one another. And when we detect a kind of vulnerability in another, or that another more vulnerable human or mammal is in distress, we are instinctively moved to alleviate their suffering. We're born with this. A 2-year-old, you know, if you take a 2-year-old and you say to the 2-year-old, here's your newborn baby brother or baby sister, and you put that baby in the 2-year-old's lap and you say, this is your baby, that 2-year-old will clumsily maybe poke the baby in the eye accidentally in an effort to care for that baby. It's not about skill. It's instinctive. And so when you see a bully, their instinct gets a bit perverted. And now what you have is actually someone who isn't feeling much of anything. And when they detect vulnerability, they are moved to do the exact opposite, which is to exploit it. So that means you could be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you know instinctively, I'm going to actually ask you, how do you know instinctively in your gut when a bully has entered the room? What does everyone do? Or what don't you do? Rather,
Rosalind shares, stop talking. Avoid eye contact.
yeah. And that's precognitive. There's no thought in that. That's instinctive, quiet. And why do we do that? Why are we moved to do that?
Barb says to withdraw so that we don't get in their line of fire.
Yeah, to keep yourself safe. Your instincts and your emotions move you to caution in the face of danger and a predator. Yeah. Now, let's take a person or a child or a youth who has experienced a lot of hurt in their life, and as a result, they're in survival mode and they're numb. They're not feeling their emotions. That instinct that registers, close your mouth, don't look, that's not registering for them. Now what happens?
Jackie shares, if they're not in flight mode, they go into fight mode. Patrick shares, become vulnerable.
Yeah, well, they are more at risk because they don't read the signals and they're not moved to caution. And so they'll walk right into the bully's line of fire and they will place themselves there. So that's why the research shows us that when people, the bully and the bullied are opposite sides of the same coin, you see. The problem's the same. It's emotional defense, emotional defendedness. Because you can take a person out of one workplace or change departments and they end up getting bullied in the next place too. So it's a bigger problem than just sort of teaching people to be nice to each other. And their fight or flight, actually, it would be good if that was working, but for people who have a loss of emotion, that does not register. So think about for a minute, before I go on to the next slide, if you take like a brain surgeon, right? They have this unbelievable capacity, like to do things calm as a cucumber. They don't flinch. Do you think they're feeling, oh, I feel so nervous right now as I'm cutting into this person's chest cavity or anything like that?
I hope not.
No, they're not feeling anything. They're cool as cucumbers. That's why they're surgeons. That's how they get there. But they have this unbelievable ability to do that and then be able to go back and get their humanity back and their emotions back and their feelings back. Because that's a stressful situation. Everything's being pressed down upon. Now, they say, the research tells us, this is fascinating, that the brain chemistry of a surgeon and that of a psychopath is almost identical.
Wow.
Difference being is one gets their feelings back and one never does.
Denise, we have a question.
Yeah.
How do you reintroduce empathy if one is disconnected to it in order to be in survival mode?
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. And this is such a big topic, and I feel like I'm giving you the Reader's Digest. I'm going to give you the best I can for the time we have. But it does have to be contextualized. But there are some general rules of thumb, and I want to talk about how culture provides for that. So, yeah, that's a great segue into culture provides the conditions for healing that feels most natural to its people. It doesn't feel alarming. It doesn't feel unsafe. It doesn't feel weird. It doesn't feel out of context. It feels natural. We're not confronting people with their demons or their wounds or their traumas or the lessons they need to learn. You know, when we confront people directly with their shortcomings, and as a parent and knowing all of this, I still occasionally do that with my 13 turning 14-year-old. He said something today and I was busy, and so the only thing I could do, which is not anything I'd ever recommend to any other parent I support, is I yelled down from the kitchen. I was in a meeting or something, doing something, and I heard him on his game say something that was highly inappropriate, and I screamed down at him. And then when he came up after, I tripped all over it because I went right in for the direct, like, I'm going to give you a teaching about this right now. And you could just see the shame and embarrassment, and he couldn't hear at that moment what I had to say. So I'll have to wait and pick a different time in the right context. I couldn't do it transactionally like that. Do you see? I couldn't get in to where I needed to get transactionally. I did not have the context to lead him into feeling what he needed to feel for it to be internal, intrinsic. Otherwise, he's just correcting his behavior because he doesn't want to hear me get upset with him again. Or he doesn't want me to take his keyboard away, which I'm guilty of doing sometimes too, out of a moment of desperation. So it depends on what your goal is. You see, it depends on your philosophical stance and your ideological stance, how you approach things. You know, we're concerned with whole person development, balance, Indigenous ways of knowing and being, cultivating societies that take care of one another. You know, our interest lies in a different place beyond just getting social fit. If we were talking just about social fit and socialization, we'd be having a very different conversation about these things. So this is Catherine Ashenberg, and I'm sorry, I should have her name in here, so if you want to write it down. Chanel, can you type it into the chat? Catherine Ashenberg wrote a book called The Mourner's Dance. It's a lovely little read. I highly recommend it. It's chock-a-block full of insight into mourning, death and mourning rituals from various cultures, early civilizations. But what she says is the truth seems to be that as long as culture supports the individual mourner in its particular traditions, whatever they are, the result is more likely to be good than bad. And when we're talking about mourning, it's not just mourning the death of a loved one, but it is about mourning our lacks, our losses, our wounds, the things that haven't worked in our life. We need places and spaces in which to come together to find our tears about the things that haven't worked. And it doesn't have to be in facing those things directly. And so I often will talk about river bathing. And I don't know, if you each look to your own traditions, there will be practices that support this kind of thing. Water is a rite of passage that symbolizes purification. And it's often done as you go from one state to the next. But often river bathing can provide the kinds of conditions for an emotional letdown to occur. You know, a prayer for some people will help with stirring of emotions and registering of emotions. There's all kinds of different ceremonies, rites of passage, and rituals that provide the conditions for this to happen. And then when there's lacking, sometimes we have to make new ones up. And that's okay. We can do that. We can make new ones up to suit our families and our contemporary lifestyles. But we need to have places and spaces that protect our need for emotional expression. And that's the travesty of a loss of culture, because rituals characterize culture. When we lose the rituals of a culture, we lose the culture. And it's not enough to just practice these things at special events or ceremoniously. This is a life way. And I was saying to Chanel, in some of the research I'm doing, I'm learning so much. But really, ritual is a complex construct. But really, when we think deeply about it, from the time we're born, from the time we die, we're in this liminal state. Life is this sacred in-between place, you see. And we've forgotten this somehow along the way. Maybe not forgotten, maybe we just have been distracted. But it's this sacred thing. And then there's all these other transitions and transformations that take place along the way. But this is this big contained in-between place that we pass through from. We're in this state, but it's temporary, you see. So when we can remember that life is this sacred dance that's unfolding, we are more likely to look to carve out pockets in our life to step outside of the busy, distracted, mundane, what they call the profane or not sacred and spiritual sort of world. And that doesn't mean you have to be religious or believe in a God, or, I mean, as Indigenous peoples, our knowledges are based on a certain kind of a spirituality, but there's even differences there in terms of what that looks like. You really have to, and that's, the program that Chanel and I are running for the Maples, we really are encouraging families to look to their own traditions and to find and revitalize those traditions as a way of supporting healing.
As you're sharing this, Denise, I was thinking about the program that I take. I'm taking the Aboriginal stream of child and youth care counseling. And a number of the young people that were in this program with me, we did just a circle, and the circle provided like that first opportunity for that safety to express their emotions. Like, it was so beautiful. So when I'm thinking about ceremony, sometimes just even being have a circle is a really amazing way to introduce that kind of safety and that space. It's like a container in and of itself, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly what you're doing when you do that. You see, we're taking care of each other. And I think I have a slide. The next slide's great. Yeah, this is what Victor Turner's one of the first anthropologists from the late 1700s, early 1800s. He articulated ritual. He called it that. He named it that. And he says the most beautiful thing, I love this: culture is made up of ritual, and ritual turns a member back to its own people to be cared for.
So beautiful. I just want to share, Patrick shares that this is what's been concerning me, the loss of regular community rituals. And Barb says, I think that some people, they don't know their rituals or the tradition, and that's a stumbling block.
Yes, and we get hung up. This is part of colonialization, and I know it from my own lived experience in my own community, is that we get hung up on a protocol or a sequence of things and doing it in the right way, and we lose. This isn't a criticism, and I'm not generalizing, but I've seen where this has happened, where we lose the meaning of it and the essence of it, and it becomes more about doing it right, and even just, we think about all of the people in our communities that like my dad kept his status, and all his sisters lost theirs because they married non-native people. And so they were out of the community, and that was injurious for them for so many years. And then they reinstated their status, and then they had to get their band membership back and all of that. There was nothing to reincorporate them. There was no ritual to reincorporate them back into the fabric of the community. Our youth, we do puberty rites and rites of passage that don't necessarily work at effectively integrating a youth back into the community in a changed state. No longer a child, not an adult, but in this in-between place, do you see? That allows a grieving process to unfold so that journey can be taken, that transformation can unfold. Are there any questions or comments? People are thinking. Is it landing and resonating? one of the professors on my committee, he's an anthropologist, and we chatted, and he says, you know, Denise, and Matt, he says, we actually do, our medical system is chock-a-block full of rituals, unintended ones. He goes, think about it. Think about when you enter into the hospital. He said, what? It's scary for starters. You're leaving your home, you're leaving your family. In some cases, you're leaving geographically where you live if you're from a remote community. You're coming into this foreign place with all these strangers. But he said, think about all the ritual and the rites of passage that occur. You come in, they type your name in the computer, they put the tag on your arm. What are some of the other things that happen in that process? And he says, does any of that contribute to a sense of well-being for anybody? And I said, no, not really. It's terrifying. It's alarming, if anything. And he said, so imagine if you use the language in now to transform how people entered and exited into and out of systems, and how they were treated in that liminal in-between place and interacted with, and how that time was considered to, as a sacred time.
Hattie shares, that is so beautiful and so simple. Barb,
Yeah, it is. Like when you hear it, you think, well, of course, this makes perfect sense, And it would transform how this is done. And for employees, people working for systems, the heart hardening that happens systemically for people working for organizations, governments, where they can't afford to have their feelings. They're under stress and they can't afford to feel. That's why I was talking to Chanel about the importance of creating places and spaces organizationally for people to come together in ceremony for all these different reasons.
And Barb shares, Denise, for some of our youth, the fact that they have been so cityfied and the parents have hidden their history, the ritual is lost.
Yeah. I am absolutely convinced that ritual, we are as much creatures of ritual as we are of attachment. And so attachment is a preeminent need. I think ritual culturally is a preeminent need. Without ritual, we have no culture. And so when I think about culture, I find it overwhelming. I'm like, that sounds so big and so monumental. But when I think about ritual, I can get my head wrapped around it, you see.
Jody says, I love Turner's work on ritual and theater. It helped me understand how art builds community.
Yeah. Are you the expressive arts therapist? Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The same can be said for mothers in a way. There's a wedding for marriages, a funeral or celebration of life for death, an engagement party for unions and love. But when a birth giver becomes a mother, there's no ceremony or ritual around this huge spiritual, emotional, physical, intellectual transformation.
And it is probably one of the biggest ones that a human body can go through, and spirit. Absolutely. Yes. So this is what I'm talking about. So if we look at this slide, I've tried to, put everything that one would need to think about around ritual into one slide, and all the different times, places, spaces, and reasons that we enact ritual in our life, and how we do it, and what we use to do it. But certain conditions have to be met. And those conditions are that it's safe, which means it's free from wounding, and people are free from repercussion. They can cry, or they can have their frustration, or whatever the case may be. They can express themselves free from repercussions. That it's expressive, that it does engage them at that level of having an emotional letdown and expressing their deepest emotions. that it's set apart from the everyday, that it's contained. There's a beginning and an end. So you enter and you exit. And so the brain knows that this is set apart from your everyday. It's the sacred. It's a sacred time and space, that it's not work, which means that, and this is so important, that when people are led through ritual, that they are not in charge of it, they feel cared for, and they're not working for their needs to be met, socially speaking, attachment-wise. That they are freed up, that they feel cared for, that they're being provided for. These are all the conditions that lead to an emotional letdown and rest in the nervous system, which is essential for getting one's feelings back. And once someone gets their feelings back, there will be growth, you see. There will be healing, there will be recovery, there will be some kind of transformation that begins. I've heard Gordon Neufeld talk so many times about the young men in the prison system he worked with that were violent young offenders, that were very hardened. And he would work with them over time to establish a relationship and collect them and you know, eventually get their story. He said every single one had a story of separation, of loss, of missing their mother, missing their grandfather, not having their father. But he said if once they started crying, they would start to recover. And they weren't bullies anymore. The heart would soften and they would come back to their senses. And now, you see, a soft-hearted person, we can't hurt another person, you see. And if we do, we feel terrible about it. Tell me if you've done that. You've in a moment of frustration, we've all done it. We've said or done something to hurt another, and we just, the shame of that comes. That is what's supposed to happen. That is when we are emotionally well and we're registering our feelings are registering. The shame and the embarrassment and the guilt and all those things keep us in check, and they remind us of who we are. Those are important things to feel too. And so do you see, if you take out, you can't take a hard-hearted person that's had chronic stress, trauma, and try to work at it cognitively or behaviorally and getting them to think about it differently and trying to shape their behavior, because if the feelings aren't right, they will only learn to perform. They will shape and alter themselves to meet your expectation, but no inner transformation has occurred. And so I would rather have a clumsy, person with a soft heart that is sincere and authentic and stumbling through than someone sophisticated and polished who is not sincere and not authentic and hiding who they really are under a really good performance, a really good act. I when my kids were younger, I used to say, people used to try and make them say sorry. And I still do this today. And they're still messy and they're still not fit for society, 13 and 11, except of course society thinks they should be fit for society by preschool nowadays, don't they? I'd rather they feel sorry than say sorry. If they have a sorry in them to say it. But saying it doesn't mean they don't feel it. They feel it, you see. Sometimes we feel it and we can't make our way to say it. And we misunderstand people. We trip over this. We reward the one who can perform it and say it and meet the expectation. And we often miss the one who can't say it but is feeling it terribly.
Patrick shares, Denise, to be supportive and full functioning Indigenous community, to help our members heal from trauma and to mark their milestones in their personal journey, we need to either recover our sacred rituals or create new ones together in humility.
Yes, that is so beautiful. And and be confident that this is good medicine, and that this is what is needed, and this is what is wanted, and that it is powerful, and that it does work, but it's indirect, and it takes great faith, and it takes great patience and a deep longing. But it's a different way, and as we know, the mainstream models fail over and over and over again to provide the kind of healing. I know what I say a lot these days. I say most interventions that are mainstream do not meet the complexity of our people. People underestimate us. There is an emotional complexity there that gets missed with these reductionistic kinds of approaches to healing that we see in the contemporary approaches, the mental health world. It doesn't mean those aren't, to throw those away. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there's something more that's needed. So when I was out, I'll tell you, this is how indirect healing happens. I was at a nation in Ontario in January, mid-January. And I had flown out there to do like a 2-day workshop and then flying right home. And we talked all about ritual and talking about these things. And the elder that was there doing the blessings and the drumming and the singing, and he had his smudge kit and all of these things. He was lovely. He heard me tell my story, and he was listening. He was listening to everything so intently. And near the end of the last day, he tells a story. And I'm wondering, where is this going? You have to be patient, right? He starts to tell a story, and I think, where is this going to go? Where is this going? And I listen, and I listen, and I listen. And next thing you know, I have tears streaming down my face. Because it was as if he was telling that story just for me. Because I needed to hear it. I needed to have my tears about some things. And he could recognize it. And so he lived it out. What I had taught. That was the greatest compliment I've ever been paid. He lived out what I was talking about, what I was teaching, but he also provided me with a lived experience of it too. It was a very beautiful thing, and I can't remember his name now, but I was so astounded at how he was able to pick up all the little bits and then find the story that was just going to land, for me. I didn't need to talk about anything. I didn't need to be put on the spot. I didn't need to self-reflect. I just was at rest in his care, listening to him share a story. And because it was indirect, it slipped past all the brain's defenses right into my limbic system, or rather right into my heart. It just gained direct access to the heart. Music, by the way, has direct access to the limbic system. It bypasses all defenses. And so music is singing, drumming. It's a very powerful way to access the heart.
I can think of so many times for myself, either hearing singing or drumming, or hearing Cree language spoken, a prayer, even being at work. We're working the event, and next thing you know, I'm just...
And this is the other great thing too, and Chanel, you've heard me say this a million times, you don't need to know what you're crying about for it to be of benefit.
Yeah.
You don't even need to know. Just softening the heart and getting the tears leads to recovery. And that's the journey. And that in itself is a rite of passage. And we need rituals for this. We need rituals for grieving our losses, for finding our sadness and being with it. What time is it, by the way?
We're at 8:01 right now, Denise.
Oh, I've gone over. I always go over. I'm almost done. Should I keep going?
I think so.
Okay. I have a lot to say, too much sometimes. Yeah, so rituals take the pressure off by accessing tears indirectly. We can help people get feelings back by leading them in all kinds of rituals. Aim to soften the heart in the context of a safe relationship. And we don't have to know why we're crying for the tears to be a benefit. Just a note, the longhouse in the Squamish language is the house of tears. And Chanel shared that her elder taught her that the sweat lodge in Cree is the lodge of tears, the crying lodge, right? I need to change that. But it's profound. We have symbols for this in the long ago. You just have to look and you'll find all these little gems. And then
It's so cool as you're talking about and sharing that with like a group. That just 2 days later, that information was shared with me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to tell Denise.
Yeah, it's profound. So I'm going to end with a piece from Wade Davis, and Wade Davis is a very, very famous anthropologist at UBC. He's written many books. He's traveled all over the world living with different tribal peoples, Indigenous peoples. Go to his website. He's got films on there. He's an amazing person. He's an amazing storyteller, but he says culture is not trivial. It's not a decoration or an artifice. The songs we sing or even the prayers we chant, it is a blanket of comfort that gives meaning to lives. It is a body of knowledge that allows the individual to make sense out of the infinite sensations of consciousness, to find meaning and order in a universe that ultimately has neither. Culture is a body of laws and traditions, a moral and ethical code that insulates a people from the barbaric heart that lies just beneath the surface of all human societies and indeed all human beings. And I will tell you what I told someone who hired me once for a health center to do a lateral violence training. And at the end of the training, I talked about all this stuff, and she comes and she says, I think we need to talk more about lateral violence. And I knew she hadn't got it, and I had failed at that training because I realized she had missed the point. No, we need not talk about that. What we need to do is revitalize our traditions, our rituals, our culture, and the rest will take care of itself. And that's all I have for you tonight.
Beautiful. So Sean asked, if one wants to review this seminar, where would it be found?
Yeah, so I am recording this, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to post this once I figure out a little bit of editing stuff and get it up. So hopefully that will be out as soon as I'm able to do that.
Great. That's great for people.
I'm sure, Denise, you've probably got stuff. I know you've done stuff with the UBC Circle of Learning, right? So, I mean, that's a great video to definitely go and watch too. I mean, you know.
Yeah. I've been on there a few times.
Yeah.
What would be nice is just to close off our time together. The best we can virtually in ritual would be just to have, maybe each of you type one or two words into the chat about how, what you're taking with you or how you're leaving, like what you're feeling as you leave this time we've spent together. And then Chanel can maybe read those out.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just reading. This has been so wonderful. Thank you. Rosalind shares, my heart is soft now. Peace. Marcy, grateful. How important it is to create space for ritual. Judy shares, raw, inspired, and open heart surgery. The power of ceremony. Charlotte shares, very enlightening. There is work to be done, says Barb. And Anne says, thank you very much.
Beautiful.
I think what just really strikes me, Denise, as we've moved through this conversation is all of the possibilities like for myself in reconnecting with culture and teachings that come from like my heritage, thinking about the things that we've done in my family as well, and then thinking about, you know, the opportunities to bring in like what I feel very connected to as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very individual journey, but also a collective journey. Yeah.
Patrick shares, I have a new resolve to see a deep cultural renewal for our community. I just love that. I work with young people, and one of the elders that I worked with shared about our young people, their spirits, their culture spirits are hungry, and we need to be feeding them.
Mm-hmm.
And Judy shares the blessings of cultural inspiration. Jody says, thanks so much. I really like the idea of addressing the victim of bullying and how they got there. I just wanted to share a book with you called Games We Should Play in School by Frank I. Cox. It is all collaborative games. When kids want to play the same game over and over, it becomes a kind of ritual.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Arva shares how you said that life is a sacred place between birth and death. We need to nurture that, support one another, and introduce or reintroduce ritual and ceremony for this.
Yeah.
Mariana shares lateral kindness is so important. Sophie seconds that. Thank you. This has been very validating and inspiring to continue the journey and learning new ways of seeing things from Patty. Thank you, Patty. And Deborah said, I will honor my moments with my tears. I know my elders are with me, and I will create safe places for others to share their emotions. Beautiful. And shares, be kind and loving to self and others. Zoe, I'm so sorry, my dogs. Zoe shares, one of the parts that stood out to me was when you said, if we can shed a tear, we can heal. Important to remember there is strength in softness. Thank you.
Beautiful. Is that everybody? Well, I just want to hold my hands up to you for coming tonight and taking time out of your evening to be here to listen to the presentation, and just to thank you. It's always a privilege to be invited into spaces to share my knowledge with people, that I don't take that lightly. And yeah, I stay in touch. And Jackie, thank you so much for having me.
We're so pleased that you were able to do this presentation for us. You know, it's been watching you over the years, and yeah, so I think this has been so powerful, so impactful, obviously for all of us. So, you know, thank you again.
My pleasure. And thank you, Chanel, for coming and helping assist.
I will always read your comments anytime you like. It really has been my pleasure here. And I feel like, Jackie, you've organized this and you have such a beautiful group of participants that it really was a pleasure and my honor to be able to read your comments and your sharing.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You know, this has been great.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Yes.